the current president of the society, Chris Jepson, and great to see a lot of old friends here and some new faces as well. Tonight is Authors Night, which is a tradition we did for a lot of years and then for some reason kind of stepped away from it for a while. And so it's back, and I'm glad to see there's a lot of interest. So we have some great authors here with us tonight. Before I make any introductions, though, I just want to mention a few points of business. One, at the end of last month's meeting, there was a little bit of a fender bender out here, outside. And so if there were any witnesses to that saw that happen, we have the fender bendee here. One of our newest members, Amy here. Would you raise your hand so people know who you are? Okay, right? Dennis Header. Just have a word with her if there's anything you can tell her about. If you saw anything happen out there, she'd appreciate the helping hand. So there's that. Next month, historian, our program in December, Richard Hartman will be speaking about Santa Ana's Company L, the local National Guard company, and he'll be talking about their service in World War I and at the Mexican border. So that should be an interesting program as well. So with that out of the way, I'd like to introduce some of our speakers for the evening. I'm going to let them primarily introduce themselves, but I just want to at least name everyone who came this evening. Cassandra Radcliff is here, the author of Saving Upper Newport Bay, How Frank and Francis Robinson Fought to Preserve One of California's Last Estuaries. Alan Hess is here to talk about his new Googie Modern Architectural Drawings of R. Davis and Newlove, topic close to my heart. Barbara Ann Burns is here to talk about her book, Sweet Alice of Riverside, Tahoe and Laguna, and a story that covers a lot of territory geographically.
It does.
Richard Brock is here to talk about his new book, Laguna Diary. And Janice Munemitsu will be, she has actually given us a whole talk earlier this year about this book, but she's here to sign and sell her book, The Kindness of Color, which involves, it's the story of two families and Mendez et al. Versus v. Westminster et al., the desegregation of California public schools. And Dr. Elaine Lewinick and Dr. Thuy-Vo Dang are here to discuss as two of the authors of the People's Guide to Orange County. And I believe that is, since I'm seeing a frame up here, that looks like that is where we are starting this evening. So
we don't have to start, it was just, we have images.
It looks like you're queued up, so why don't we...
Should we go first? Sure. All right,
do it.
I'll pull up the other images. Hi everybody, we're so happy to be here. I'm gonna forgo the microphone. Can you all hear me okay? All right. I didn't want to just have only our book cover when there's a whole bunch of authors here, but we do have images. So the image on the left there is Lucy Gutierrez, who is a high school student who walked out of class in 1972. And she walked to El Salvador Park in Santa Ana to join in a protest with students who wanted to see themselves in their school curriculum. They wanted other things too. They wanted more Spanish-speaking staff, and they wanted an end to mass suspensions. They didn't get any of it in 1972. They, in fact, were all mass suspended. But her challenge to us in 1972 to see herself in the curriculum is something that students are getting to see more and more now, 50 years later. Because now there is rules in California high schools requiring that students learn ethnic studies. And now we get to help, we who care about local history get to help tell how people of color have been here for a really long time. And they have stories to tell. We keep hoping we'll meet Lucy Gutierrez at one of our talks. We haven't yet. We don't know what happened to her after this suspension and after this demand, but we hope to think we're still fulfilling that demand.
Can you maybe introduce yourself a little bit more?
Oh yes, hi. I'm a professor at Cal State Fullerton. I specialize in suburban history and environmental history.
And hi everyone, I'm Thuy Vo Dang, and I am currently a professor in information studies at UCLA, although while I was working on this book with Elaine and Gustavo Arellano, our third co-author, I was at UC Irvine in the libraries, being an archivist and a curator in special collections for something called the Southeast Asian Archive, which is a really unique collection, one of a kind in the country actually, that documents the histories of Cambodian, Lao, Hmong, and Vietnamese communities scattered outside of the homeland, but primarily, here in California and here in Orange County, where we have the largest representation of Vietnamese overseas. So I came to this project with Elaine and Gustavo because we really felt like our complementary skills in journalism, archives, oral history, urban history, environmental studies, could really help to present stories about Orange County that amplified the voices of those who have been either on the margins of that history or who have felt that they have been misunderstood or misrepresented. So we try as much as we can to bring some of these stories to the fore, and the book, Elaine loves to share that it's called A People's Guide to History, because it really is one, a beginning, a conversation and an invitation to others to contribute what they know from lived experience and from their engagements with various communities, from the indigenous communities that have been here for a very long time, to newer refugee and immigrant communities who are now just making Orange County their home. So that's kind of the introduction that I'll give. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I don't want to say too much. It's called A People's Guide, but it's not just a guidebook. It's centered on issues of power. So most guidebooks to Orange County don't even actually name Orange County. There's a lot of guidebooks named A Guide to Los Angeles, Disneyland, and San Diego. Like, we're just Disneyland, And our book does have Disneyland in it, but we focus on power contests at Disneyland. This is riot police preparing for an invasion of hippies in 1970. We talk about labor contests at Disneyland, efforts to have LGBTQ freedom at Disneyland. The stories that aren't the ones that are most often told. And I wanted to show a couple other slides to just say, we don't do this work alone. Our guidebook has stories of more than 110 sites around the county, and nobody can do this alone. So Thuy and I, and Gustavo, who couldn't be here tonight, did this while also doing listening tours all around the county. And there's some images of people who helped give us ideas as we wrote this book, including high school students who we asked to be our peer reviewers, to read it and make sure that we weren't just writing like professors, that we were writing something that was readable. And it was a high school student, Joyce Jogway, who helped tell us what our book was about. So we put that up there. I don't want to take too much time, though. We have some other authors. I want to hear about all their books.
And then I think we'll have time for Q&A with everyone else, right? Chris?
Yeah, we have, these are some of the stories. This is the oldest continually occupied house in California. It's in San Juan Capistrano, occupied by Ahachinan people who built it as part of the mission. It's also part of the smallest Mexican land grant in California. And these are stories worth knowing. The story of water here and what water has meant to this county, there's a lot more to say about these different images of lack of water and too much water and who's involved and how water has shaped us, but it's part of the story you'll get in our book. And then the stories of finding the other stories of water that sometimes aren't even written in English. These different archives that don't get paid as much attention to. This is a corrido, which is a Spanish song, a little like country songs, where there's songs that tell stories. And Emilio Martinez's corrido from 1938, it haunts me because it includes the line, no one will ever forget. Nunca lo podré olvidar. And yet, I think too many of us have forgotten the flood of 1938.
I was on the roof, I was 4.
You don't know.
Yeah. The water was halfway up in Anaheim. with the
Yes,
house.
that's actually what that might be you on the roof. On the right, those are people on the roof. There are other stories, and we don't have time to tell them all, but stories about who desegregated the county, stories about the way the military actually was a force of desegregation here. And I hadn't, before I wrote this book, I hadn't understood that the military could be a force of progressivism as well as a force of conservative politics. And there's stories about incredibly ordinary living spaces. If we had more time, I would tell you all these stories, but I just want you to see this house and know it is historic. There is a bigger story to know. You can find it in our book. And stories of taco trucks at every mosque. Twee, I've been talking so much. Do you want to tell this one?
No, it's okay.
Okay, all right, we're going to go quickly through this. So taco trucks at every mosque, it's an Orange County movement to bring Latinos and Muslims together around food. And it is the Orange County that I live in. It's the Orange County my students live in, but it's not the Orange County we see in so many media representations. And that story of Latino-Muslim unity and activists here, for us, it was really important to tell it, but part of what's been fun about seeing this book move out into the world is seeing how important it's been to the people in our book, to see themselves in a book. So that's what some of these images are. These are the activists who started taco trucks at every mosque, really celebrating that they're in our book. And then, do you want to tell this story, Twee? I can do it really quickly, but it's yours.
Well, this is my son, so I should tell the story. And this was him 3 years ago when he was a 3rd grader. Now he's in 6th grade, and he had an American Heroes project at his school. So we decided to go on an ethnographic research trip and visit all the sites related to Kazuo Masuda, who you probably all know has a middle school in Fountain Valley that's named after him. So Austin got to experience this moment of recognition and representation, right? Certainly, we're not Japanese American, but as an Asian American young person, it was very empowering for him to be able to relate to a figure in history and then have to dress up like him. And there's a little bit of a resemblance. And tell that story in a way that is nuanced and complex and about a family's resilience in Orange County, about how they struggled,
This is the Masuda family.
during
If you don't know that
Japanese
story,
incarceration. Yeah, where his family was incarcerated, he was killed in combat. They had to come back and reclaim their family farm. This is Mary Masuda, his sister, and really kind of amplifying beyond like the sole male figure in often a lot of historical tales, right? We're trying to tell a more complete picture of other players that were equally important in understanding this history.
So before our book, Austin's teacher gave them a list of heroes that they could dress up like and research, but the list was all white people. And Austin was the only Asian kid in his class that year, and it was important to him to have a hero who looked like him. And so having Twee as a mom meant he could find an Asian hero. But it also meant that we feel like there's a need for our book because people all deserve heroes who look like them. They deserve to know these stories, and the Masuda story is an amazing one. I'm sure many in this audience already know it. There's a lot of those stories in our book. We have the book for sale, thanks to Marilyn who just arrived. But you can also look for us on Instagram. We have a discount code if you buy it at UC Press. You can, I made this PowerPoint for the Fullerton audience at Cal State Fullerton, so you don't have to come to Soch Week or sign up for 16 class. But
they can come on Saturday because we will be at Orange Library at 3 p.m.
Yeah,
the main branch.
More length because now it's time for everybody else to talk to. So should I close this down, or do you guys want to leave it up for some of these impressive pictures?
I don't know, do any of our others have PowerPoints? Yeah.
Do you? Oh, all right, I'll close this down.
Why don't we just kind
I'm
of...
having trouble with the trackpad.
How much is the book?
I'm not sure how much Libro Mobile is selling it for.
Oh, as is.
The book, so 25, is that right? Am I making that up?
Yeah, well, you get a
List
30%
price.
off discount code if you
We
want.
take cash and cards.
Well, I apologize that our time for each of you is so short. It's just,
We didn't want to take
you
too
know,
much time.
there's, I want to make sure we get everybody in this evening.
Yeah.
So, why don't
We did good.
start with saving Upper Newport Bay.
I'll take this off so you can all see me and hear me talk. Okay. All right, so I'm Cassandra Radcliff, and I wrote Saving Upper Newport Bay. I'm wearing my Newport Bay Conservancy shirt. I was last week just voted in as the president of the Conservancy, so if you have any questions about the Bay or how to volunteer, I am the right person to come to. But I wrote this book, and it actually published in 2020, and we had a book launch party in March of 2020. And I'm still masking, but at that point, you know, COVID was just hitting, and it was a very nerve-wracking experience, but nobody got sick at the party. We had it at the Muth Center. So has everybody been to Upper Newport Bay, the Muth Center, kind of familiar with it? A few hands, yeah. So if you haven't gone, you definitely have to go. And there's this really beautiful painting we have on the front of the book. We have plein air artists all the time come and paint, and this is the one that ended up on the front of the book. So the book is about how Frank and Frances Robinson, they were two people who lived in Newport Beach, they found out that the Irvine Company was going to develop the area to become a marina, just sort of like, you know, the lower bay, and then the Huntington Harbor is kind of built up, and they were going to make a great pleasure harbor. So people were going to be able to, you know, pull up their boats. You know, they actually used to be able to just launch their boats from the shore there, but they wanted to build it up so you could have your marina there. And they were kind of upset about this because they bought their house the year before, and they were like, well, we want our kids to be able to go to the beach. So they started fighting it, saying, you know, not in our backyard. We don't want this beach closed off for our kids. And then it just kind of tumbled into something else. They became kind of environmentalists, and it's this really interesting story that you wouldn't expect, really, if you just thought, oh, they, you know, saved a place to become a park. Like, it's not. It's a lot more exciting than that. There's a court battle, there's, you know, a corporation involved versus the little people, and the little people win over the corporation, but it's not, you know, cut and dry like that. It's, the Irvine Company wanted to build up the area, but nearing the end of the 70s, they kind of understood things are changing a little bit, people want to save places as parks, and so it kind of morphed as time went on. But I think there's a lot of really interesting things in here, just kind of through the 60s, because it started in the early 1960s, the fight to preserve the bay. And it changed so much in Orange County through the 70s, and even into the 80s. So in here, it's a very short book. It's 100-something pages, and then there's some pictures in the middle, and someone actually walked up before we started and said, I might know who these people are. So if you've ever been to the Bay, especially in like the late 90s maybe, and did some volunteer work, you might know who these people are, Frank and Frances Robinson. And then there's other people in the book that are, you know, either still around or they were around for a very long time. You might know who they are. And that's pretty much it. Over here we have membership forms if you do want to donate. All the profits from the book go to the Bay and protecting and preserving it. And there's also little brochures if you want to take one home and go visit later on. So I think that's my little spiel, just for the book.
Thank you very much. Janice, why don't you come up and refresh us on your book?
Hi everyone, it's great to be back. I was here in March. Lots has happened since March. Janice Minimitsu, I wrote this book called The Kindness of Color, and many of you know the Mendes versus Westminster story. But if you haven't read my book or heard me speak, you might not know what a Japanese-American family and their farm have to do with it. My father was 20, and my grandfather owned a farm, 40-acre farm in Westminster, and when they were forcibly removed to go to internment camp, incarceration camp in Poston, Arizona, they had to figure out what to do with the farm. And through the kindness of Mr. Frank Monroe, because some of the people, when I was here in March, some of you knew of Mr. Frank Monroe. He was a banker. Through his kindness, he linked our families together, and that became a wonderful dream of the Mendez family to farm. They always wanted to try it. But what they didn't realize is when they moved to Westminster, their kids would not be able to go to the regular 17th Street school. And so now we have two different kinds of inequity, unfairness, racism, but through the kindness of many people, and in some cases it wasn't that the circumstances changed, but through the kindness of different people, it gave our families hope and support. And ultimately, Mendez versus Westminster, they won. The families won. It would be the Mendez, Palomino, Ramirez, Estrada, and Guzman families versus 4 school districts here in Orange County. And that led to the desegregation of California public schools in 1947, 7 years before Brown versus Education. What you might not know, too, is how a Jewish attorney, a Catholic judge, a white banker, 2 very well-known young NAACP attorneys, Thurgood Marshall and Robert Carter, as well as the Colorado River Indian tribe, are involved in this story. And if you're interested in the Colorado River Indian tribe, I just went to a pilgrimage of 250 Japanese Americans who returned. It was like 3 weekends ago, and really got to meet some wonderful Native Americans who share the land and the history of Poston. So I'm selling my book, and it hit number 2,353 on the Amazon list. in the U.S. history and local history section. But I think there's at least 10,000 books, so I think this is... But thank you for supporting and also just sharing the story of Mendez, because so many people still don't know about it. I speak often for the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles to educators, and today was the Los Angeles County Office of Education, and there were still a couple of people, leadership educators, who did not really know about Mendez. So please share the story with your friends and family, neighbors, educators, because we all, as you all said, we all want to be able to share these very multicultural stories of collaboration and inclusion. Thank you.
Richard?
Sure.
You want to run slides, or you need me to run
Actually, all we
slides?
need to do is just, it's automatic.
Oh,
So what we need to do is do slideshow. Next, I'll do it, actually. Let's do that.
Yeah, you don't want me in charge of the high-tech stuff.
Okay. Well, it's not moving automatically like it did on my computer. If you wouldn't mind, just if you can manually push them forward while I'm doing this.
Do you want to point at me?
Sure.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Good.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm very impressed with everyone who just gets up here and wings it. I don't wing it, especially at this age. And I will tell you, I came in from the desert, I'm freezing to death. It's really cold. I had to go and put an extra t-shirt on. And to you and you, Gustavo, I read him every day in the paper. He's great. I'm linked in with him too. So maybe we have something in common. Okay, my name is Richard Brock, and I am a novelist. Well, I'm more than a novelist, but my name is Richard Brock. My pen name is Richard Leslie Brock because there's another guy in Colorado who's named Richard Brock, and he has written 2 books, and I don't want to confuse anybody. So anyway, so that's why I've changed it. My novel is Laguna Diary. This is my 3rd novel, and my 4th will come out next year. There'll be actually 3 of mine over there, just for your curiosity. To Chris and Stephanie, thank you for inviting me. especially inviting a fiction writer to a history exposition. But mine is within the genre of historical fiction. So it is accurately set within Laguna Beach at the time frame that I was there. I lived there for 50 years, and I currently live in the desert, as you just pointed out. So they say a speaker is supposed to start with a joke. So I'm horrible at jokes, so be forgiven here. Never argue with a fictional character. Why? Because their minds are made up. All right, thank you very much. That's the biggest response I've ever gotten for a joke. Okay, so relax a little bit. I am a historian. As you see, I am in classical history. I'm also a folklorist out of UCLA in the program that they had there when a long time ago. It's gone now. But I do have an advanced degree in folklore and mythology, and most of my work was done in San Juan Capistrano, by the way. So you'll see a little bit of that in this book as well. And I'm also an instructor of law now at UCR. So that's what I pretty much do with my time. I also do local history. So to reassure you a little bit more on my background in terms of history bona fides, most of, or many of you, or some of you will remember me from last year. I was on Zoom, and I was talking about Modesta Avila from San Juan Capistrano, the first convicted felon in Orange County history, 1889. And there were several falsehoods that were told about Modesta, which I tried to clear up, including the fact that one of the most prominent falsehoods about her was that she was sentenced to prison, which she was, but that she died there of tuberculosis and potentially left a baby there as well. The good news is her story was at least happier than that. She did live, and that's pretty much documented at this point, and also married one of her prison inmates as well, so her life moved on. I'm also trying to twist Chris's arm, so I'm going to put him on the spot right now, because I wanted to do an update on the Irish Alcalde, which was written by, Ellen K. Lee in 1973. She was with the Tustin Historical Society, and she wrote about the Irish Alcalde, which was Richard Egan, Dick Egan, or Judge Egan. And my paper is basically the King of Capistrano, but it focuses on whether or not he was ever involved in the Civil War as a Confederate blockade runner or as a soldier himself. So we're working on that. Hopefully we'll get there. And so I'm continuing on the history side. So I got to bump up my history bona fides because I'm the only fiction writer here. Okay. So before I discuss the book itself, I wanted to touch on the differences between history and historical fiction. First of all, in brief, history tends to focus on the 5 W's. We talk about who, what, where, when, and why of past human events. Historical fiction, like Laguna Diary, tends to focus on the experience of history through the inner workings of the mind or the emotions of a character. So we see it more from an internal perspective rather than from a time marching on perspective. So it has some things that history can't do. So 2 key themes of this book are the philosophy of place and the World War II impact on American experience up to the late 70s when the hippie period came in and Vietnam hit hard on American culture, counterculture. So what is the philosophy of place? Essentially, it focuses on how location is defined by the humans that inhabit it. In other words, a place basically is a geographical spot that you can find using navigation principles, but that doesn't define the place. It's the people who impact the place or experience the place that define what it really is. So it asserts that time and human experience change a place even as its location stays the same. So those of you who might be T.S. Eliot fans will hear echoes of this. Okay, so that's what the place focuses on. The World War II theme was included because until the Vietnam War, World War II was an important aspect influencing American identity before its worldview moved on to the hippie culture that we saw in Laguna Beach and also Vietnam, and it changed how we saw ourselves as a nation, among other things. That's one of the things that was a constant. So my characters are all involved in some way, have a tangential connection to World War II, and of course I'm talking about mid-century time frame in Laguna Beach. So that's where we are as a setting. So as to the story, a very, very quick synopsis would be: boy meets girl in Laguna Beach and they live happily ever after. Okay, we're done. Okay, and if that's too brief, girl born to illegal immigrants from the island of Capri, they're Italian, escaping the after effects of World War II, and boy born to American World War II veteran, meet in Laguna Beach and they live happily ever after. Still in enough, is it? Okay. Here's the long version. Okay, 5-year-old Jake. Jake's father was named Frank Wade. He was an Army veteran who fought in the Pacific Theater. Frank allegedly abandons his family on a stormy night on Coast Highway while on an errand to Arch Bay Liquor in South Laguna Beach, which is still there, by the way, to pick up a bottle of Manischewitz wine. And that's partly because his wife was of Italian descent, and she believed that Jewish people were basically the people that you went to for advice, and they advised her that the best wine to drink was Manischewitz. So Manischewitz is important because it fits in the glove box of the car that I'm going to describe in a second. Okay. So he wanted to get the wine both for his wife and for his the pain in his leg because he was hit in the knee by a sniper's bullet. So he limps, and he becomes a school teacher in Laguna Beach when he returns from the war. When he's at the liquor store, he notices one of his high school students who's outside trying to have an adult buy beer for her. And as a responsible adult, he says, "You can't do this, I'm taking you home." She lived in North Laguna, he lived in South Laguna off 3rd Street. Okay, on the way home, about a block away, on a dark and stormy night, a truck is coming down 1st Street and hits the back of the 1951 Hudson Hornet, by the way, 1951 Hudson Hornet. It spins around and it basically sails off the highway down a vacant lot near 3rd Street, which is, that vacant lot is still there, by the way, although they're building a house on it now after all these years. I just noticed that 6 months ago. So, but from the boy's standpoint, the father has abandoned the family and him for a teenage girl, one of his high school students. And that's what he believes for a long time. It's only later that teen Jake learns that his father did not abandon him. Instead, his Hudson Hornet was hit by a truck not far from Arch Bay Liquor, sails off into the sea, but it hits the sea intact. Hudsons were really built well, okay? Sailed up 100 feet, landed in the water. He and the high school girl are killed on impact, but the car is floating like a whale. The storm pushes it south to West Street Beach. If you're familiar with South Laguna, it's basically near 1,000 steps. And there's a cave there that only appears every once in a while, usually with big storms. The sea had eaten away the cave, it was opened up, the car floated in, the storm filled it back up again, and the car disappeared. Okay, so now, Jake rediscovers the car one day on another stormy night. It's about 10 years later, and he sees the frame of a car inside this cave. He investigates, escapes the waves and the storms and everything that's going on, partly through the advice of his father or through things he'd learned from this diary. he learns how to navigate this, and guess what he finds in the glove box? Because it's one of the only things that has survived is the Manischewitz bottle, which leads him to learn and understand that his father never abandoned him, so there's an emotional connection to this whole process. Okay, later, okay, now I should have mentioned the diary. Jake kindles a relationship with his deceased father through the diary. In the diary, his father is writing him notes and telling him about local folklore, like things like this. If you see Catalina Island, I'm sorry, not Catalina, San Clemente Island, you will see from Laguna Beach. If you see it from Laguna Beach, it will rain within 5 days. If you know Laguna people, they will tell you that same thing, and it's actually true. I tested it. I had 50 years to test it. It works. Okay, now with climate change, it may not work, so you can't hold me to it now. but it did work. Okay. The diary was filled with local folklore, including the OCHS, Indian myths, legends, and personal notes as I said, addressed to 5-year-old Jake. Later, of course, Jake meets Victoria. Victoria is born to illegal Italian immigrants who cross the border at Tecate. Her father was a fisherman. He never learned to swim, but he could quote Homer word for word, even though he was illiterate. He learned it basically. It was oral tradition for him. So Victoria sees Jake, her future love interest, save a man, the father of a woman, or a girl, I should say, from the sea, and saves his life as well as the daughter. It turns out that her father drowned trying to save her, so she sees something in Jake that she wished Jake could have been there to save her father. So they start to form this bond. And Jake and Victoria from there have many local adventures, including going to Lake Elsinore. We're about here now. They marry at the Sarah Chapel. And the ringing of bells is done by Pablo Anacleto Arbizo, who was the bell ringer. He was the factual bell ringer who took over from Aku Cruz, who was the bell ringer sine qua non. Okay, Paula Arbizo was cousin to Delfino Olivares, the great-great-great-granddaughter of California Julian Enriquez, who owned Rancho Laguna de Temecula. Okay, built on former Mexican, okay, and then they later attend UCI, which was born on Mexican land grant called Rancho San Joaquin. Okay. So
I may have to stop you there.
That's it.
So
that's it.
So now you told the story, nobody needs to buy your book.
There's a ton more. Okay, now I'm going to hand it off to a real historian.
I'm sure there is much more to the story. So thank you very much. Alan Hess, why don't you come tell us about Googie Modern?
Okay. Hello, yeah, great to be back here at the Historical Society where I've given a couple of other talks. Always glad to be able to talk about my latest book. This is my 21st book. I started in 1985, so it's spread over a number of years. Googie Modern. Googie is a style of modern architecture. It isn't given much respect, not the respect that I think it is due. We think about here in Southern California, Richard Neutra, Rudolf Schindler, Frank Lloyd Wright, all of whom were great architects. But Googie architecture is pure Southern California, which spread across the nation after being invented here. It's part of our car culture and of the mid-20th century, the time when suburbs were growing and people needed some place to go to take their family out to a reasonably priced dinner. These were the coffee shops. You all know the names: Bob's Big Boy, Norm's, Pam's, Ships, many others, all across the Southland. So the architects of Southern California invented a new style, a new type of building. And that's what this is about. That is what Googie is. One of the main purveyors of the Googie style as architects were the firm Arme and Davis, who are just this year, they're still in business, they're gone, but the firm is still in business. They were started 75 years ago, and we haven't gotten quite enough publicity for that accomplishment. So I happened to, my first book was on Googie architecture as well, when it was not very well appreciated or understood, and it was being torn down. Those of you, if anybody went to UCLA, you'll remember Ships on Wilshire. That went down in, I think, 1984. And I was there the last night. It was in operation. And the morning the bulldozers came, I was able, with a couple of other friends, we bribed some of the workmen, and we got some of the light fixtures and the doors and some other elements out of the building. One of the light fixtures still hangs in my house at this point. There is this style of architecture which is from Southern California, something we can be proud of, and which needs to be better known and appreciated. The mid-20th century is not about just, James Dean and drive-ins and poodle skirts and all of that. Because Googie architecture is modern architecture. Its forms follows its functions. And it happens to be very broad, exaggerated, exciting, eye-catching forms, because that's what you need in order to grab the attention of a hungry customer driving by at 30 or 40 miles an hour on Wilshire, Ventura, Harbor, or whatever. So it is modern architecture. It needs to be taken seriously, and that's part of the purpose of this book. I know the surviving partner, Victor Newlove, of the firm, and in his office, they're up in Santa Monica, he has the most incredible archive of drawings, including client presentation drawings, which are 3 feet by 4 feet. They're enormous. Hand-drawn, pencil drawings. That's what we very professionally photographed and reproduced in the book. I'll see if I can show you. Oh, this just opens it up. This is one of the original sketches for norms as they were developing the design. This doesn't look like the norms we know today, but this is because this is about architecture. These architects were evolving their designs. They weren't just throwing something off and then going out and building it. They had very conscious reasons for designing it in a certain way. And these drawings prove it. These drawings show that this is not just a quick sketch on the back of a cocktail napkin, but rather very consciously developed architecture. So we have in this book and the book, as you can see, is not 3 feet by 4 feet. We're hoping to have an exhibit where people can actually experience these, because these drawings are literally cinematic. They're huge. They start out on the street. You can see down the commercial strip. There are cars driving by, so you can feel the setting of it. But then with all of the detail that goes into it, you can actually, in your mind, walk into it, go through the front door, sit down at the counter, see the pie cases overhead, order pie. This is the brilliance of these drawings, this graphic art, that really puts the client in the place of a potential customer and convinces them that this is what they need to sell their restaurant, and through these drawings. There are a lot of other elements to this book. As I said, this is actually my third book on Googie architecture. My first was just that thick, not very much. and I had a really hard time rereading it a few years later. It was my first output for a book, and it was a little bit embarrassing to me. But I had a chance to revise it and double the size of it and create another book, and then this is my third book. There's so much, again, many of these books tell us stories that have never been told. And that's what I'm interested in, not covering territory that everybody has already read or known about, but discovering what is unknown and a whole new interpretation, a whole new sense of Southern California, Orange County, comes from this sort of research. I always love it when people are researching new areas. So I just want to end with two bits of information which are new in this book. One is one of the architects who worked with Armand Davis, a guy named Lee Linton. This is one of his drawings on the cover of the book. It is mid-20th century. You see in this style, which is very hand-drawn, free-form, energy, and it puts you in the place through the style of the graphic drawing. Lee Linton should be known along with other great graphic renderers like Carlos Denise, who did many great architects' renderings for client presentations. So that's one thing which this book, I hope, is contributing to expanding people's understanding. The other one is, in my text, I write about how the office operated. Who were the clients? How did they work with them? Who were the staff? Who was on the staff? And created these designs. And in that case, I've been able to document another member of the staff, an employee, a woman named Helen Liu Fong, who started working with them about 1950. And she was born in Chinatown here in Los Angeles. She went to the University of California, Berkeley, not in the architecture school, but in the planning school. Came back to Los Angeles, worked for an architect, Eugene Choi, who had gone to USC, who worked in the same building as Armand Davis. And so she very quickly moved over to Armand Davis. She was the designer of plans, of norms, of the interiors of these buildings. She hasn't really, well, she was involved in an exhibit at the Chinese American Museum up in Los Angeles a couple of years ago, but she deserves a lot more credit. And so these are some of the stories along with all of these others, which give us a whole new perspective on our history of where we live, what this place is all about, Southern California. And so that's why I enjoy writing about these people and these buildings, and to talk to you also this evening about that. So I think that's about it, but I am selling them over here afterwards if you'd like to come up and leaf through it and get a sense of the excitement of these buildings that comes through. So, thank you, Chris.
And last but certainly not least, Barbara, would you like to come tell us about Alice?
Thank you. I didn't bring my PowerPoint presentation. It's really long. But I have some pictures. Thank you, sir. Good evening. Glad to see you all out here. I'm surprised there are so many historians that come out for things like this, but we had a really big turnout at the Riverside Historical Society a couple of weeks ago, so go figure, we're a certain type of people. I'm here with a lot of really good books. I kayak the Back Bay every month, and I'm excited about your story about that discrimination and yours about the Japanese, and I love that architecture, and I have some pictures in my book by the same author that he's got in the front of his book, so we've all got something in common here. I'm here to tell you about Sweet Alice, and I don't know whether you know the Mission Inn Riverside, but it's been there since, well, actually Alice started it in 1874, and it's still running. It's always been owned by a private family. It's not a Hyatt or a Marriott or anything like that. And Alice's family came out here from Wisconsin when she was about 14. And the only hotel in town burned down, and all the other people who were staying in the hotels in town had nowhere to stay, and her father, being a very hospitable fellow, said to his wife, "Why don't we let the people who are displaced from the hotel come live with us?" And that's how they got in the hotel business. Nobody had ever been in the hotel business before, and actually nobody in the family wanted to be in the hotel business. But they made a nice little hotel. It first started out being mom and the daughters, and the sons did a little bit of work here, but it was mainly the mom and the daughters doing all the work. And the oldest daughter ran off and got married right away. And the mother decided she was too sickly to run a hotel. So it's 14-year-old Alice who gets the responsibility of running the hotel. And as it turns out, she loves it. It's the kind of thing she felt she was born to do. She's 14 years old, and people are asking, is Alice here? Can Alice come to my room when I need something? And everybody else kind of faded away and did other things, and she made a really successful business out of the hotel for the family. But her dad simply did not want to be in the hotel business, even though his whole family lived there and it was kind of handy. So he puts the hotel up for sale, and Alice is devastated because she thought this was going to be her career for the rest of her life. When she had found her calling, they send her off to a college which she doesn't want to go to, but in the meantime, Dad puts the hotel up for sale, and the oldest brother, who actually gets all the credit for the mission inn, Frank Miller, he buys the hotel because it's a good investment. He sees that his sister has really developed this business into something that can carry on. And so Dad's, great, leave me. You know, I'm going to go do something else. And he sells the business to the son. And the son buys it on the caveat that the sister promises that she will manage it for him, because he knows she's the brains of the business, even though he got all the credit for it. So interesting thing about Dad is when he leaves, he goes off to Laguna Beach. And he's the first surveyor in Laguna Beach. And his name and the son-in-law, who married the older daughter, both surveyors, come down and do a lot of the first surveying that they did in Laguna. And it was Chris who helped me discover that this little girl, Alice, who had made a lot of money working for her brother in the hotel all these years, she didn't have to pay rent, she didn't have to buy food, she just ran the hotel. She's got a pile of money saved up. And she's got a son and a husband who's not very well, and she's thinking, I don't own the hotel, I have nothing to leave my son. So she goes down to Laguna Beach, where I found a little reference from another Riverside longtime author. She said, I think there's something about Alice on Lot 2, Block 5, Laguna Beach. Something about $4,000. $4,000, that's a lot of money. Chris helps me. We're digging through these old books in the archives, and Alice buys like 400 pieces of property at $10 a piece. In 1904, in her own name, not in her husband's name. And what she's got is, well, she's got this beautiful chunk right here. This is 2529 Coast Highway. And she buys all 40 acres down south of it down here, almost all the way down to Victoria Beach. And the idea is that Riverside is so hot in the summer, nobody wants to stay there, so we used to come down in tents and camp on the beach. There was a Riverside tent camp, and a Pomona tent camp, and a Pasadena camp. But Alice thought it'd be nice if her friends had cabins, and she bought herself a little cabin that was right on the coast. There were just two of them there, and there's photos that they were there from 1874. And there's the first, and then we thought they were just a little artist shack. It's actually a William Went painting that we have at the Mission Inn, like you have in the front of your book, that shows this little green pyramid roof-shaped house right there on the cliffs, all by itself in 1874. And we thought it was just a little humble artist shack, but no, it was the house that Alice built for herself, and she spent the next 40 years having vacations there. And she bought two little houses. One was a nice pyramid-shaped octagonal place right up high on the cliffs, and next door was a little smaller one, which she gave to her best friend Rose Hardenberg, and the two of them spent their vacations there for the rest of their lives up until the 1930s. So that's how Alice got to Laguna Beach in the first place. A third of the book happens in Laguna Beach because she's there right about the same time all the artists are coming. And so there's only like William Went and George Simons. I can't remember the names when I need to, but all these great Impressionist artists were coming into Laguna Beach. And there was only one post office and one telephone, and they all knew each other, and they looked out for each other. And Alice was aware that all these guys had they'd come from Europe originally, some of them. A lot of them from back east, but now California, was owned by the United States, and artists wanted to paint it before we ruined it with all the people coming in, the telephone lines. So there were all these artists, and they of course settled in Laguna Beach because it's a beautiful, very scenic place, and Alice got to know them all. And she lived in this hotel that was built of cement 30 miles inland, and there was nothing to hang on the walls very much there. And so she meets all these great artists, and she's thinking, this will be really good. I can give the artists a market to sell their art in. My guests who are coming out from all over the world and staying at the Mission Inn would like to take a souvenir home with them. So she starts having this relationship with the artists of Laguna Beach. And eventually the hotel is covered with all these beautiful impressionist paintings, and they're selling like hotcakes. We don't have hardly any of them anymore because people just bought them and they were wonderful. But there was a time when the Mission Inn was selling as many antiques and art products as they were making on guests coming in. So the Mission Inn was wildly successful under Alice. Her brother buys it, they continue to run it, they built this big grand destination hotel, which is the part you see today when you come to Riverside, the 1903 section, and then there's more and more and more all up until 1931. But the brother and sister were this terrific partnership where he respected what she did and she respected what he did, and he went out and brought the trains in and he got the highways to come by and he made Riverside a county, and she made sure you had flowers in your room and she remembered your name when you came. And if you didn't want any attention, she didn't give you any attention. But if you wanted a lot of attention, she would take you on tours all over Riverside. There was a trolley car that she would drive herself, and she would take you out to Box Springs, to where the water flowed fresh down Arrowhead Mountain, and then she'd take you over to the Sherman Indian High School where you could see the Indian kids play football and beat the USC team. And then she would take you to the foot of Mount Rubidoux, and there'd be a car there that would take you up to the little mountain in the top of town, and you could look out all how beautiful Riverside was, and hopefully stay and buy a piece of property or an orange grove or something like that. They were big boosters trying to get wonderful people to come and live in Riverside, and they did. I mean, I live there now, and I used to live here. It's a nice town. They spent a lot of time bringing in people. They have 11 presidents stayed there. 3 months after they open up, the President of the United States comes. I'll finish with this one cute little story because I can tell that Chris is getting anxious. This is very typical Alice. Theodore Roosevelt is there. Everybody who's important in town is there. And poor Mr. Roosevelt has to plant one of the navel orange trees that we got in front of the hotel. So he's got his shovel and his jacket's over his arm and he's digging a hole. And everybody's there, but Alice is not in the picture. Alice, of course, is the manager of the hotel, and the president is coming for dinner, and she needs to make sure that everything is going swell inside the hotel. So she goes down to the kitchen and checked with Chef Zwang, who was this great Chinese chef who was Frank Miller, her brother's dearest and closest confidant. And she walks into the kitchen, and right away she notices that Chef Zwang is wearing his finest Chinese silks, and he's in the kitchen. And she's like kind of askance, and he looks at her with great disappointment because she is just wearing the dress that she often wears around the hotel. And she says, "What's wrong, Zwang?" And he goes, Mrs. Richardson, the President of the United States is your guest today. It is a time to wear your finest clothing." And she looks down and says, "Well, okay, Zwang, if you don't think this is nice enough, I'll go on and buy her a dress." So she goes upstairs, puts on something nicer, goes about her business of running the kitchen of the whole hotel for the day. She takes Zwang at the end of the day and introduces him to the president, and they have a nice meeting. And afterwards, she goes down and says, "Well, how do you think the day went?" She goes, "It was wonderful. I was so glad you introduced me to the president. I was very honored, but I couldn't believe about his poor choice of clothing for the day." And Alice is the kind of woman who took the Chinese workers at the hotel, and when the immigration people were coming and threatening to arrest them, she would jump up in the middle of the night and get out the touring car and run down and load them all up in the car, and they'd go out and hide out in a friend's house for a few days. So she was that kind of a woman. She befriended all kinds of artists who fled from Europe during World War I. They were very good friends of the Japanese. When the Japanese people were not being allowed to buy property, the Millers had a great big party for 50 of the most successful Japanese business people in town. They had gone to Japan and they loved it, and they told them about how the great friendship they wanted to forge between the Japanese people and the American people. That didn't work out so well for a while, but the story ends with Alice. This is a beautiful portrait painted by the guy named Hafsep Pushman. There's artists are like authors. They're a dime a dozen. You probably don't know this guy, but he did paint a really beautiful portrait of Alice Miller Richardson because he loved her dearly. And that Those stories were all told in the book. And I got the book over there. It's 129 pages, not very long, lots and lots of pictures. And I enjoyed the heck out of writing it, so I hope you all enjoy reading it.
Well, as you know, several of our authors tonight have said, it is extremely rewarding to be able to dig out, research, find, and tell stories that haven't been told before. And you know, as historians, sometimes we do need to go back and retell stories that we think everyone knows, but there's a whole new generation that's come along that hasn't heard them. But the real nitty-gritty, the good stuff is to be able to dig out something new, to tell something, a story that hasn't been told before, or to go back sometimes, and it is an older story, but with new context, with new understanding, to know new pieces of it, and to be able to tell it in a way where it means more. You know, we have that in, I think, all of our authors' work tonight, where they've really contributed something new to local history, and we appreciate that greatly. So thank you all for coming tonight. This is why we have a County Historical Society. We want to keep encouraging this kind of good work in our community. So thank you all, and now, as promised, all of our authors will be signing and selling copies of their books, so it's a good opportunity to ask them questions, and so I encourage you to do that. We also have a few refreshments at the back table there, and if you are not currently a member or you need to re-up your membership, Lynn is at the back table and can help you with that as well. So thank you all for coming this evening, and we look forward to seeing you in December. Thanks a lot.